Nearly there. Actually, can you guys hear me in the back without the mic? Are there people virtual? It's being recorded. Should probably use the mic. In which case, I won't be walking around. All right. Welcome. How's everyone's day going? Good. Man, first talk after lunch. If you fall asleep, I understand. I won't take it personally. I'm Josh Mason, and today I want to introduce to you some of the ideas that I've been using in my life, in my sales, in my work, and hopefully it brings some value to what you do in your roles. So this is how to win trust and stop hackers. One of the most difficult things for folks in cybersecurity is influencing others, trying to get them to change their actions, trying to get budget to go through, trying to change policies, trying to sell things. It can be very, very difficult. It, for me, I think is the hardest thing in cybersecurity. The technical can be learned. The getting the software, the tools in place can be done. But trying to influence other people, whether they're your colleagues, your leadership, your customers, that I think is the hardest thing that we do. You could work for weeks and weeks and weeks trying to get something to happen, and your outcomes might be resistance or pushback or indifference. And that's hard. That's what leads to burnout. That's what makes people not want to keep doing this work. So what I want to do is help you with that. Some of the things that I've been using that I think will help you as well. Start with a story. I used to be an Air Force pilot. I flew C-130s, and I'll talk about that all day long if you let me, but that's not what this is about. I stopped flying and became a cyber warfare officer after some family and health stuff. And my first job as a cyber warfare officer was as a flight commander at Hurlburt Field at the 1st Special Operations Communications Squadron. My boss, the squadron commander, was essentially the CISO and CIO for 7,000 endpoints on that base. And we managed that base, several different networks there. We had seven different networks, including secret and top secret for AFNet, SOCNet, AFSOCNet. It was a mess. We also had to manage bases that were outside of our own because it was the headquarters for Air Force Special Operations Command. And we had people downrange who relied on us and our servers and our services as well. And it was kind of a lot of work. I learned in that job, or I would bring things up in that job because we would have staff meeting almost every day. I was essentially the deputy to the CISO, the CIO, and we would have things that would come down from Air Force, from the Pentagon in general, from headquarters AFSOC that was across the street, different strategies that they would want for the operation of the base that the networks relied on, that we needed to be able to support. And I, having come from a flying, a pilot and operations background, I would tend to side with the base commander, who is also a pilot, because that's what happens in the Air Force. Pilots lead everything, unfortunately, for everyone else in the Air Force that's not a pilot. And I would push these ideas, or I would bring up like, well, what about this, or what about that? Because that's kind of, I'm used to that back and forth of, what about this idea? Especially among pilots, bringing up those sorts of things was normal, was common, was expected, was trained into us, actually. That's how you were a good co-pilot and a good wingman, is to, at ground speed 0, ask about this and that and the other before you got in the plane and did things. In the communications squadron, it meant we butted heads a lot. I was looked at as someone who couldn't just go along, that wouldn't do the job, that was asking all these things, and it was super frustrating. After about 6 months in that job, my boss was getting promoted and moved up to the Pentagon. And he gave me some 6-month feedback. He's like, Josh, I don't see you having a future in cybersecurity. I was like, that's okay. I don't either. I had been trying to get side duties where I could go and teach, go back to the Air Force Academy and be a professor, or go to this school over here and teach a course for a year. He's like, if you want to teach, the Air Force Special Operations School is right across the parking lot. No kidding, the next building over. They have a spot for a cyber warfare officer. That guy's about to leave. He's also going to the Pentagon. And you can go and teach there. And if you don't like it, you can come back and continue to do this with a different boss, probably. And so I got to go and teach at the Special Operations School. And there, I was introduced to a few different mentors. The commandant and my department head, they both had a whole different mentality. They're both stoics, and they introduced me to Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. They were like, Josh, here you're going to be training people and teaching them concepts that you're not strong in. This is a special operations school, and you've been at this base for 6 months. You haven't deployed in special operations. In order to speak to folks and be useful, you can't rely on what you thought you were doing as a pilot. As a pilot, we all trained, we all came up through the same path. We all worked from the same books. And if in a briefing you were like, oh no, it should be this, because we drop it 500 feet, because that's what the book says, it's knowledge that everyone has. Now I was working on things, how do we do strategy and operations and special operations where your commander is not actually truly your boss, where you're maybe an Air Force person with an Army unit working for the Navy in a place that's never going to be in the newspaper. Who is your boss, and how do you actually teach that sort of thing? So I had to learn how to speak to people in terms that they understood, and imbue in them a mindset that I couldn't just rely on expertise. I learned how to influence people. I used it for training. I've used it in consulting. I use it in sales. And it's what I want to teach you. Because if we can learn anything from my 6 months in cybersecurity at that base, struggling to make things happen, even when I was talking to someone who we had the same goals. We wanted to make things more secure. We wanted to meet standards. We wanted to fulfill our DISA STIGs. If saying DISA STIGs made anyone have some PTSD, I'm sorry. I understand. What I realized in all that is knowledge alone isn't enough. Instead, we need to, I'm going to say this word a lot, influence people. We need to change people's mindsets. There's not something special that you need to get. There's not software. There's not even a book that you need to go read. Everything that I'm going to be covering now, you have the ability to do. The hardest part is going to be thinking about what you've been doing, how effective it is, and how you might continue to do it again in the future, and see if making little changes, even in the order of words, can change your output, change your outcomes. I also want to include in here, I'm autistic. For me, understanding what other people are thinking doesn't come naturally. It's had to be learned. So when I found how to win friends and influence people and have that mindset of, oh, this is the way to connect with people, how to listen to people and have a real conversation and understand where they're coming from and how to relate back to them was hugely influential. I know there are a lot of folks in cybersecurity who are neurodiverse, and if you have a similar background to me where you need a roadmap on how to do things, man, I love instruction books. I love guides. I love really good documentation. If you give me software with amazing documentation, even if it only does 25% of what you sold me, but it has great documentation, like I'm still happy. So allow this to be your documentation. One of the key principles that Dale Carnegie shared, and he was teaching this stuff over 100 years ago. The first version of How to Win Friends and Influence People came out in like the 20s, the 1920s. None of this is new. But the first principle, talk in terms of the other person's interests. And it seems obvious, but in anything that we're doing, if we can find a way to speak in the other person's language or in their interest, we will have way more impact. So, to follow that, you all are in cybersecurity. I'm not going to speak about how I would change things in a flying squadron. While I feel like I could probably do 50 minutes on that from my past experience, that's not valuable to you. So thus, we're going to speak about how can we get people to want to implement MFA? How do we convince the CFO to give us budget to buy this next software? How do we convince people to put in place the security protocols that we've established and make them want to utilize them in their operations? Another big Carnegie mindset is begin with praise and honest appreciation. You all have taken your time today, a Saturday during the holiday season, to come and hear about cybersecurity, to talk to others about cybersecurity, to become better at your jobs, even just a little bit, when you could be enjoying some time with family, getting your shopping done, trying to prep for whatever travel I imagine a lot of you have coming up, or ending the year with sales or projects. There's a lot you could be doing, and you've chosen to be here. And I appreciate you taking the time, not just to be in this room or in this building, but in this room hearing this. I truly appreciate that. When you start with honest appreciation, people are more apt to listen to the rest of whatever it is you're going to say. And it doesn't have to be false. It doesn't have to be made up. What I just said, I genuinely am blown away by how many folks are in this room. And we've got people standing and sitting on the floor in the back. There are seats up here. Feel free to make friends if you'd like. But I am blown away by that. Once I started on this rabbit hole of understanding how to empower and influence other people, I found the book Influence by Robert Cialdini. And he takes a different approach than Dale Carnegie. Dale Carnegie set out with researchers and they found the best books. They interviewed a lot of people. They tried to find out how do people influence, or how do people work with one another? How do they sell? How do they become good leaders? What is it that they say and do? And they took a rather unscientific approach to it. Whereas Cialdini is a doctor of some sort. I don't know. Probably a psychologist. And he took that scientific approach to how do we influence people. A lot of research, a lot of trying to find out the core methodology and what does it really all boil down to. Some of the principles that he mentions in his books and his talks and courses are authority, reciprocity, and social proof. And we'll be talking about how a little bit of those and how to work those into how we influence people. His approach wasn't the same as Carnegie's. Carnegie, no kidding, was trying to help people be more effective as friends, as in relationships, at work, in sales, in marketing. Cialdini, on the other hand, wrote his book, and in there boils down how do you avoid getting tricked by tactics that people use. And frankly, it's a social engineering book. You can read through it and find out how will people socially engineer you. What should you look out for? And what should you be mindful of? And how should you think about those things when they're brought up to you? I want to use them because not everything in there is negative. Not everything is malicious. Anyone do system or network admin type stuff? Anyone have a detection rule for Nmap? Yeah, because if Nmap's on your running on your network, you assume it's malicious, right? But is Nmap a malicious software? No, it's a networking tool, right? It was developed for network admins to better understand their systems, right? In that same way, what we'll be covering, you could use maliciously, or you could use it productively. It's all up to you and how you approach things. One of Cialdini's one of Cialdini's principles is the authority. If you can start with setting a baseline for your authority, whether it's your education, your certifications, or leaning on other principles. If you get a assessment or a vulnerability scan, and there's a report that comes out of that recommending this, that, and the other, and these criticalities, you can use that as authority, that a professional has said, these are what we should be fixing. Or CISA or NIST comes out with recommendations of these are the things that you should protect. Should be going for full 50, right? You're good. Scaring the crap out of me. I cannot wrap up 30 minutes in 3. It doesn't have to be our authority. It can be the authority of other sources that people trust and rely on. It could be the company's ethos. It could be the company's strategy that you use as your authority. If you want to get across, we should implement MFA. Like CISA, NIST. Everyone says, if you can, turn it on, right? You know it, I know it. But who has MFA implemented 100% across their organization? It's not a lot of hands. Dig more into that. Reciprocity is another great tactic. People use this even without thinking about it. One of Cialdini, in the chapter that Cialdini covers on this, they did studies of people holding doors. Just the simple act of holding a door for someone as they're entering a room, and then you getting up to the teller, up to the counter, and like at a store for buying something, asking, "Oh, I don't have enough change. Do you have like an extra $1 to the person behind them that they held the door for?" There was an exponential difference in someone's willingness to say, like, "Yeah, here's $1," for those that they held the door for versus those that they didn't. And that's one little example, but there was a lot more research done in that if we do one little thing to help someone else out, their willingness to help us out is so much greater. With that, is there something that you could be doing in your organization from a security point of view that could help out marketing or sales or operations if you could put an hour of effort to get them to be interested in helping you fulfill your requirements? Would that be easier than fighting and fighting and fighting for weeks or months or quarters to get the same thing implemented? Social proof is another one of the factors. People tend to follow what others are doing. They're obviously at lunchtime, everyone wanted to go get lunch. Some of us knew what time it was and we were hungry and we went. Others saw people just moving in that direction and followed. There's a weird, like, small hidden line between our conscious and our subconscious that acts like that. There's things that we do that we don't think about that fall in line with that so often. If you see a group doing a thing, subconsciously, there's a little bit of you that automatically thinks that's an okay thing to do. We see it in criminal groups. People use it often for scams and crime. But we could also use it in a productive manner. If you can get proof that other organizations are implementing email filtering, especially competitors. Say our competitors are doing this, and they made a blog post about it. You don't even have to follow up with, we should do it ourselves. If you were to bring that up with leadership, there's a good chance if you just left a pause, they might be like, well, could we do that too? You didn't even plant it. You're utilizing social proof without even needing to say the second half. We'll put a lot of this into practice together. I've got a few case studies. Because these are neat ideas. Truth be told, I've been reading this stuff and I re-listen to the audiobook for How to Win Friends and Influence People almost monthly because I find new ways that it applies to my situation. For me, it's not to be sacrilegious, but it's almost more helpful than like reading through the Bible. I just find I can apply it faster. But let's talk about the situation of MFA. We all know it's not a silver bullet. It doesn't stop everything, right? We're talking about that at lunch. However, it does stop a lot. If you follow the news regularly, you might be like me and be like, well, if you guys had MFA on, that would not have happened, right? I'm getting nods. Some of you feeling what I'm feeling. How do we get our organizations to want to implement MFA everywhere? We could share what I just said. Here's all these examples of organizations that have been breached because they didn't have MFA on. This business email compromise occurred because they had password reuse and account reuse, right? Could we have stopped that? If that was an effective means of changing things, we would have MFA on, right? Instead, what else could we point to? We could point to CISA and NIST making those recommendations. We could lean on, company, you sent me to this SANS training, or you paid for me to take this course for my master's, or you paid for me to take this CISSP course. In that course, validated what I know about the value of MFA. I think that we should implement it, leaning on that authority, especially authority that you convinced them was already valuable. They have already bought in a little bit. If they paid for the training and that training taught you a thing that now you're bringing back to them, that's why they sent you to the training, right? Without making that connection for them, they're already going to be thinking it. Like, well, I sent them there. We should use what they learned. Sometimes it's the technical jargon that gets us lost. I said MFA. Pretty sure everyone, is there anyone who doesn't know what I'm talking about? Multi-factor authentication? In this room, that works fine. Because those of you who didn't know what it is, or raise your hands, I'm pretty sure you're just messing with me. It's using two different methods for authenticating. Okay. Your marketing people, your operations people, your CEO might not know what MFA actually stands for, or what it really means, or why you would want a token or an app on their phone, or to get SMS messages. And so you might need to explain that as well. Is there a way to speak in their language to get them to understand the value of what it is that you're trying to implement? So we're back to that talk in terms of the other person's interest, OPI, abbreviation I made up. If you're a bank and your leadership are finance, bank, operations people, there's a chance in 2024 that they understand some technical things. You know what they really understand? Bank stuff. Vaults and credit and securing loans. And if you can start finding analogies to terms that they care about, terms that they use regularly, to relate back to what you're trying to do on the technical, on the cyber, on the IT side, you can usually get them to buy in a lot quicker. We might say, oh, we need to mature from NIST level 2 to level 3. Or we're working our way through CIS 18 and we're at 8 and we're moving to 9. And our implementation is segmentation, which I think is a lot lower than that. But you get the idea, I think. Your goals of maturing the organization are good. They're righteous. Proud of you. Do they care? What is it that they care about? What's the mission of the bank? The mission of the bank is to secure and provide financial services for customers. If it's a credit union, it might be certain kinds of customers. It might be farmers. It might be, you get it. In that, can you, instead of, we need to make this change, we need to make this maturity, we need to implement MFA in order to mature in our cybersecurity, say, in order to provide and better fulfill our obligations to our customers and our creditors, we need to improve our cybersecurity maturity, and the next step in that would be implementing MFA. Are we at a point where we can start to provide a higher level of service to our customers? Taking that question to them, rather than saying, are you now ready to have a budget discussion about MFA? Say, are you ready to have a discussion about how we can better secure our customers' data and finances? Because that's what they care about. That's the other person's interest. And it's just a few words. It's just a small change in your terminology. But it has great effects. I'll lean on Cialdini and Carnegie for their examples. I would go into depth, but it's going to take longer than what we have. But that's an idea of how you can start to implement that. Commitment and consistency. People are more willing to continue doing the thing than they are to start doing a new thing. So, if you've been able to plant a seed to start some inertia, that can feed into further movement. How that can relate and how you can use that if you want to implement MFA everywhere. Talk about things that you've already accomplished and the organization has already done. We have already purchased E5 licenses for everyone in the organization. We have invested this money and this time, and we've moved our infrastructure over. In that, one of the best next things that we can do is click a few buttons that automatically turn on MFA and require people to register and download the app and turn all that on. It's like, well, if their mind is already at the, we've already paid for this, we've already committed to going down this road, as opposed to, oh, hey, we want to turn on MFA because it also happens to come with our E5 licenses. Just starting with that, their interest before, and the commitment that they've already made, and consistency. We want to keep moving on this path that we've built on. You're not going to see as much resistance going down that methodology. Let's take another look. A phishing filter. This might be contentious. Anyone had an issue trying to implement something like this? Trying to implement a phishing filter? What sort of pushback have you gotten? Gonna miss my POs. What about you? They're worried about missing something because it goes in the spam filter. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, they're worried about false positives messing up business. Those are legitimate worries. And obviously, people have run into that exact thing. But it's valuable, right? Yeah. So, how do we fix this problem? People are worried. We know that it's valuable. How do we make them feel that it's more valuable? We can use a lot of these same principles. Rather than focusing on it's going to improve our maturity, it's going to protect our organization, it's what we should do because it's a better thing to do. Those all sound like, they might sound like fighting words. They might sound like, well, that's just your opinion, dude, right? However, if we use some of the principles that we've talked about, like honest appreciation, we can start with find something that we do honestly appreciate about them. Like you guys have been speaking to the organization. You all have been very helpful in accomplishing your cybersecurity awareness training, or you all participated really well in the training that we had a couple months ago, back in October. If that fits, if that's the case, if you do have honest appreciation for them. Or some companies actually point out when someone does turn in, like hit the report spam or report phishing. Let's bring that up. Like we've seen a lot of great true positives come back when people hit that report phishing, and we really appreciate it. You are helping the organization be more secure and helping us to provide better quality and consistency for our customers and our colleagues. One of the next things that we could do is implement a phishing filter so you don't have to do that as much. By starting with honest praise, they're like, well, okay, that doesn't sound so bad. Maybe it will be worth it. You could also lean into scarcity. We talk about scarcity in social engineering, right? oh, this needs to be done now. Like, you've only got, the sale ends in 1 hour. We could utilize scarcity in, this is the fourth quarter of the year. We need to make sales. I know marketing and sales and probably operations and finance are all interested in those things. Are there deals that we're leaving on the table because our SOC 2 doesn't say that we've got a MFA across the enterprise? Are there deals that we're missing out on because our competitors have implemented this? By not having phishing filters, that's not something we can attest to being complete. And our auditors can't show, yes, they are doing this thing that they say they're doing. Are we losing out on deals because of that? Because we know these guys are doing it, and they just closed a $5 million deal. Other person's interest, scarcity, and if you can start with honest appreciation, you might not even need to say anything else. They might be like, well, how do we get that implemented? They might come to you requesting it. There's also social proof. If you could get one department to buy in, maybe marketing is really where it'd be, or sales, because they have a lot of inbound and outbound email, right? I've done sales. You can't miss customer or potential customer emails. That doesn't work well. You don't close opportunities that way. But internally, if you could get IT to turn it on, because you could probably convince the IT department to turn it on, you're like, how is that working for them? If you can go to marketing and say, hey, we turned this on in IT, it's working really well, we haven't seen any issues, and it's been working great for them. We've had less people clicking on links, we've had less spam just showing up in inboxes. Is it something that we could turn on for you to make life easier? If you can use those other principles as well, now that you've shown it works over here, you might have better input getting it to work over there. Executives. Easy and difficult to trick. Difficult to trick because if you don't think like them, and don't put things in their terms, they might not be interested. However, if you can speak in their terms, which is why I got myself an MBA, so I can use that jargon, you can move things, you can make things happen. So an EDR investment. Maybe we want to implement CrowdStrike Falcon, or maybe you don't want to implement CrowdStrike Falcon. If anyone here is from CrowdStrike, we'll all feel for you. I had another sponsor, so they got a booth out there. But Falcon works pretty damn well. But it's expensive. That's a lot of money. How many salespeople could you hire or implement Falcon across the enterprise? Salespeople bring things in. Falcon, we know it's valuable. How do we prove to them that it's valuable? You go in with specs, you go in with proof, you go in with white papers. If you need to convince the CFO and the CEO and the COO to budget 6 figures, 7 figures, depending on the size of your organization, for this tool that will be implemented over 6 months and might, cause some turmoil until it's in place, and once every couple of years might blue screen everything. How do you make that pitch? Well, we could lean on authority. NIST, CIS, CISA, all of them in either NIST CSF 2.0 or CIS 18, endpoint detection and response is a low tier thing to implement. It is one of those where, I'd want to implement it as soon as possible, right? As a security person, even if it's just Defender on the Windows machines that they have, like turning that on and making sure that it's configured. Like, who would want to have that off versus on? Yeah. So we know. How do we get them to know? So the authority. We lean on my training, my education, my years in the business. These organizations, PCI that we have to comply with, or HIPAA that we have to comply with, or as a bank, the things that we have to comply with, say that we need to have this as a minimum. Lean on that. Then you can get into social proof. Other organizations implement these things and they don't show up in the news. The banks that do show up in the news as being breached, the healthcare organizations that do show up, are they implementing these? Do we know that our competitors have just implemented Sentinel-1 or Google Cloud Mandiant recently? Is there something that you could use competitors for social proof? That also leads into that scarcity. If our competitors are doing it and we're not, that's something C-suites care about. They don't want to be left out. What it really comes down to is empathy. Understanding what matters to that other person. And rather than trying to get your value across, trying to get their value across. You know your stuff. They hired you to know cybersecurity. Your value is in that you know these things. Where you can really provide is, now that you understand those, how can you make it valuable to them? There's a bit of this that might feel like you're using people. With influence, with things that could be social engineering, we don't want to take advantage of people. So where is that line? Is using these principles, is using these ideas right? I have a minor in philosophy. Thanks. My first university course was in ethics. This matters to me a lot. And I'll lean on Immanuel Kant. What is right is to treat people as an ends in themselves and not as a means to an end. And I've written papers and I could go on for hours on what that means. But are you treating people as human beings and helping to provide for them based off of that? Or are you using them and trying to influence them for your own means, for your benefit alone and not theirs? A lot of this stuff, what we do in cybersecurity, the reason I love still being in cybersecurity is that we help people, we help society, we help companies. There are criminals out there. There's organizations that want to steal your data, want to take advantage of all the things that we put out there. If we do our jobs right, we make that less. We protect people, we protect companies. I don't know, you might not be in cybersecurity because you want to help people, but I got a good feeling that you do. Similar to cops, firefighters, and military, there are those who do it for self-righteous reasons, but from what I've seen, most are doing it in order to help, in order to make society or their communities better. If your goal is collaboration, improving the organization, helping the company meet its goals and remain secure and safe, if you're acting in that capacity and you're not treating people as a means to an end, then you're doing things right. Having that alignment with goals. Because what you want and what they want, you haven't tried to convince them away from something they want. Instead, you're using what they want to accomplish it together. They want to make better sales. So saying that being more secure, competing or matching your competitors, getting things out so you can have a better quarter isn't wrong. Instead, it's helping them reach their goals in a way that they didn't even know was an option. So we started kind of late. I'm going to run through this real fast. The first thing that you can do, if you do nothing else, begin to build rapport. Work with other organizations inside your company, inside your client base, inside your community. If you have the goal of mutual support, of helping other people accomplish their goals through what you know and through what you can do, it's going to go a long ways. If you just start with that mindset of collaboration instead of my cybersecurity goals, but our organizational goals, that'll move the needle forward. And offer value. I'll probably close with this. I'm a huge fan of the book, The Phoenix Project. Anyone read it? It's about IT and cybersecurity and DevSec or DevOps. There's a turning point in that book, in that organization, in that mindset of stopping to look for what I'm trying to accomplish and more what is the business trying to accomplish. And ironically, it's not a battle. Instead, if I can get behind what the organization is trying to do, if I can turn my expertise behind what marketing or sales or ops or even IT, if there's a battle between cyber and IT, if we can help them accomplish their goals, even if it doesn't necessarily make ours move forward, but if it's something that you can add value to, that overall will move everything forward. So start with offering value. Patch Tuesday comes out. You're not in charge of patches, but you know it's going to be a pain in the butt to update everything across the enterprise. Do you have the time? Do you have the time to get over there and be like, hey, could I help out? Could I bring donuts? Could I bring coffee? If it's going to be a crappy Wednesday through Friday for the IT team that is in charge of that, how could you add value to them so that when you need to make things move, reciprocity, collaboration, they want to help you out. All right. And yeah, establish credibility and authority. Don't come in with, I know all the right things. Instead, if you are able to build that up, you will create a wave behind you. You start with collaboration. You start with getting people to trust you. You'll be surprised months, months, years down the line, people will turn to you and ask for your opinion on what needs to happen as opposed to fighting you in those meetings. All right. So I've learned a lot. I hope you have all learned a little bit from this and have an idea of where you can go, what you can do in your organization. If you've got any questions, we'll speak in the hall or in the other room. That way they can start with the next group. And yeah, sorry, racing through the end of this. If you need to get a hold of me, I'm on LinkedIn, Joshua C. Mason. And yeah, thank you all.